So a ton of information just dropped on Diablo 4. The developers, Rod, Joseph, these guys are doing a ton of interviews out there, and I am going to go ahead and basically summarize it for you all. Some of these are in different languages, so I had to refer to other sites that have summarized them as well to get at least hopefully a better picture on what I'm reading and all that good stuff. So I'm going to do my best to go ahead and give you all the important information in this video. Let's get into it. So the first interview is by Game Informer here, and Wowhead has done a pretty good job of summarizing a lot of these different articles, so you guys can follow along. I'll post some things as I'm talking about them on screen here. But first off, we have a lot of the Game Informer article was talking about post-launch quarterly updates. This is important because this kind of involves seasons, and I did talk about that a little bit in my previous video. Now, I do want to mention that in this article, they talk a little bit about additional quest lines and story. That's the kind of word that they use. And as a correction, Rod Ferguson went to Twitter and basically said that he's going to be talking about seasons and expansions a lot more later. But a lot of people are misinterpreting this article with Joseph and are referring to story. And instead of story or campaign, he really is talking about new quest lines, new context, and new seasonal mechanics. That's what they're referring to, not actually specifically new campaign. And that's a really, really big difference because one is oftentimes something that people skip, and the other one is core to how the seasons will work and how they will end up changing and be a little bit more fun. On top of that, they went to describe the premium season pass and how it's going to cost $10, and that's going to basically be included with the content quarterly updates. Also, they talked a little bit about the Nightmare Dungeon affixes, but these are nothing new realistically for the most part, except for one of them. They talked about how a shade that can follow a player and kind of basically blind you a little bit. Also, they talked about Helltide zones, which are areas of the map where just get overrun by demons, and a lot of areas in the world can be affected by these at one time, and this is specifically referring to the open world. Now, this next article, InVen over here, this was in, I think it's Chinese. I'm not 100% sure, so I had to do a little bit of translating, and obviously, it's probably not perfect. However, there are some massive implications with this article. First off, the account-wide renown rewards, potion charges, skill points, Paragon points, and obols, the things that I mentioned were kind of core to the renown system, will be reset. Now, the question is, does this mean that everything that accumulates renown will be reset? We will see, because after they basically said this, they explained how they're going to make renown feel as non-repetitive as possible. Bonuses gained from altars of Lilith will not reset, and this is a pretty big thing, which, assuming that you're going to get the altar of Lilith's bonuses, that means that you're probably not going to have to find them in the map to get the renown. That's my guess. So in my previous video talking about the seasons, I basically said that renown rewards were going to be reset because it doesn't really make sense to start a new season with all these Paragon points and skill points, etc. But they may not reset altars of Lilith, and it looks like I was exactly right. And this is a really good thing. I think a lot of people were worried about doing things like the altars of Lilith, and if they continue to do things like this where they make the super repetitive mechanics not having to be repeated, as well as a little bit more interesting by making it as non-repetitive as possible, as they're explaining, this is a huge bonus for seasons. And I'm curious to see how they're going to reset the renown rewards, but also not make getting renown repetitive. I'm curious to see how they're going to do it, but it looks like that's the goal, and I'm very excited that that's what they explained. Now, this next interview comes from WCCF Tech. Not heard of it, but they have a lot of things to say with Kaylee and Joseph. First thing is the Paragon system. We were talking about all about Paragon boards, Paragon system, and how it's improved since the Diablo 3 one. I think it's pretty basic to understand, but Kaylee mentions that it's an entirely new system except for the name. And I think that's a pretty good, basic summary. It's entirely different. I don't think those two are really too comparable. Yes, it gives you stats sometimes, and yes, it can have that similar where it's grinding so you can get a bunch of extra value for your character. But in terms of how the glyphs interact with the nodes, what pathways you're going through, how the Paragon boards link, it's basically like it's as close Diablo 3 is as close to Diablo 4 as potentially like one skill tree in an MMO is comparatively to another skill tree. They're just not really the same, although they have a similar idea, if that makes sense. One other thing is that they mentioned that the Paragon board is going to be a huge time sink. So as Joseph mentions here, it's nothing you'd accomplish in a single season. I think this is a little bit I guess you could say doubting your more hardcore player base. I absolutely think you can max it in a season, although we'll see for sure once the season launches, of course. I think that for your average player, it'll be a definite no. However, the more casual players are going to be focusing on the seasonal journey. They want players to find combinations of the points that they'll be earning and feel like they are maximized, and keep in mind that there's going to be a respec cost, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it provides some sort of weight and meaning to your Paragon and your overall build, but there are still not any hard lock-ins. It's just that you have to consider and make sure you're making smart decisions. They also talk a little bit about the glyph system and how you can input glyphs and how you can level up those and all that good stuff. I went over all this in my Paragon system review. And one other thing is that they talked a little bit about how Diablo 4 is sort of turning a little bit into an MMO, and whether or not they're going to add other MMO-like activities, like raids, for example. But as Joseph mentions, Diablo Immortal has done a lot, and how they've added cool features. For those of you that don't know, Diablo Immortal has PvE raids, although they're pretty basic and very easy. But they mentioned that they want Diablo 4 to remain firmly in the ARPG camp, and they're not making an MMO. They're making an online game that has connected community in some places. This is a big difference because, well, I think that to some degree, this is kind of what I've advocated in Diablo 4, which is that Diablo 4 is an ARPG with an open world. And the open world is a core mechanic of Diablo 4 and how it's kind of integrated with what they're trying to do here. Have a connected feel, have a lot of collaboration in the game. However, they're not going to go the MMO route and add things like probably dailies, raids, specific group dungeon, like heroic dungeon content. And they say that, well, as one might say, this is a strictly MMO only feature, like the open world, for example, or the itemization is a strictly ARPG feature. I think that generally is kind of the perspective that we go into, but I think that, as they say, it'll get a little bit muddy over time, and I absolutely agree with this. And a lot of things, for example, like the Trinity system, the Diablo 4 won't push people into any of the classic roles. I think this is a very important point to make, which is that most often your MMOs are that Trinity system, and so group content, you have to build those specific comps, whereas the ARPGs generally focus more on just building a cohesive squad rather than having specific roles, although you do tend to have support roles, damage roles, and then specific damage roles. And they say that everyone's going to be a sort of damage dealer, and every person or every class deals a little bit differently. It's not necessarily going to be specific role-based content, but you will have roles, if that makes sense. Lastly, we have the article from PC Gamer, and PC Gamer honestly kind of just repeats a lot of the things that we've heard from the previous article from WCCF Tech, which is that Diablo 4 is an action RPG. It's not meant to be an MMO, but they're including the open world to make the game feel a lot bigger. And I absolutely do think it accomplishes this goal. Those of you that play Diablo 3 or Diablo 2, you kind of have that town, and then as soon as you get out of the town, it's just a bunch of demons. The world kind of feels a little small, and there's not really a ton of activity. It feels like you and a couple other people are the only people in the entire world, which is a little bit awkward. And so I think that the open world does accomplish that goal if that's what they're trying to do. Whether you like it or not, I do think that all of us can agree it does feel a lot bigger. On top of that, they mentioned how, again, they're not going to do a Holy Trinity type system, which we just talked about in the previous article. Also, it's going to take about 80 hours to complete the season journey and the season pass. So as your average casual player, if you consider, let's say, about 4 to 5 hours every week, and the season lasts for 3 months, that's 4 to 5 hours. That's a really casual player, by the way. That's going to be about 12 weeks, right? Multiply that by 4 to 5, you're going to end up in the 48 hour to 60 hour range. And so if you're trying to match the absolute most casual player, it's a little bit too long. But I do think that I would say, average casual player has anywhere from around, again, as I mentioned, 4 to like 10 hours a week to play, and this definitely kind of reaches around that middle ground with 80 hours to complete the season journey, because I know that's oftentimes a goal for a lot of casual players. I personally could not care less about it oftentimes, but I do think it's a little bit more fun. Also, reaching level 100 could take a little longer, based on how you play, longer than 80 hours. So that is a consideration. Obviously, if you're absolutely blasting, we're gonna figure out ways to level much faster than the season journey. They obviously haven't done enough testing to, compete with a lot of the other testers and people that are just gonna be playing the game hardcore. They never do. But that's pretty impressive, guys. I think there's a couple really, really important things that I just want to touch on before I end the video here. And the first one is really, really diving into the season mechanics. As Rod mentioned earlier on in the video, how they're going to talk a little bit more about seasons and expansions going forward, and how they're not going to try to make you repeat everything in terms of renown systems or make it a little bit more exciting. They definitely could do a lot of things there. I think that really bodes well for future seasons. And also the time allotment in the game, how it's going to take about 80 hours, and how you're not going to be able to max out the Paragon board. I think those are the two most important things to think about. 80 hours, I think that's a pretty reasonable amount of time. I think they kind of did a good job on that if you're looking to complete the season journey, which is what most casual players are doing. I do think that they could probably tune back the leveling time allotment, maybe make it a little bit easier, because although I do think that there's a lot of content available earlier than that, and you can experience a lot of the game, making it so that people can reach max level, maybe interesting, and could definitely be something that a lot of casual players want to do. So I think giving them that option instead of making it a lot more difficult could be a good thing. So let me know what you guys think. This is a huge update, lots of information here. I'll be on the lookout for more information soon. A lot of this stuff dropped literally yesterday. So definitely interesting stuff, and hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.